Right, good morning, everyone. So great to have you all here. And I'm Macroeconomics, and I'll be taking this lecture on principles of economics for you. Right. So if you have any questions before we start, please send them through. Otherwise, we will start in a minute. Okay. Right. So I guess we can start. We have about 80 here. Housekeeping before we start. Now, you know that this entire course will be done in English, but if you I will put in a few words here and there in Sinhala, but if you have, don't worry if you don't understand. You won't miss anything. I will repeat everything in English because the medium is English, so you won't miss anything. And I will record the lecture and upload on LMS. The lecture and the slides will be there on LMS. And yeah, so if you have any questions, please, you can always switch on your mic and talk, or you can send in your questions in the chat box. Okay. But great if you can keep your microphones off. Otherwise, if you don't have a question, and also your cameras off. Do you have any questions for me before we start? Or one more thing, I have a test. You know that because I'm sure you would have done a few modules by now. So there will be a test. It's going to be an MCQ test, and this will be on LMS. You'll have to do this at the end of the third week. So keep studying, go through the lectures every week. If you have, you know, right? Right. So who's this? Pramodita, can you off your microphone, please, if you don't have a question? Right. Any questions again? No? Right. All right. So principles of economics. I don't know, some of you may have studied this for your A-levels or for any other course probably. Some of you, it must be new to most of you, I presume. So we will go at a pace, since this is a diploma, we will go at a pace that suits everyone, so that, you know, we are on the same page throughout the course. Right. So during the course, we will be looking at a very brief introduction to economics. We will then talk about the consumer. Okay, let me actually record the lecture.
Recording in progress.
So under principles of economics, we will be studying a very basic introduction to economics. We'll talk about consumer behavior, how consumers make decisions, because ultimately we're talking about the market, the consumers, the producers, the involvement of the government, and so on. So we'll talk about how consumers make decisions, talk utility, then we will move on to the other side of the market, the producers, the suppliers, the nature of supply. Then we talk about the equilibrium of the market, what factors affect the market equilibrium, for example, taxes, different other factors affecting the equilibrium, the price of the market, price of a good or service. Then we'll talk about how a firm works under theory of firm. We'll talk about production, cost decisions, then market structures that you find in the markets around you, price mechanisms, Then if there's, we will try to talk about a little bit on macroeconomics, but it's not expected at this level, but we'll discuss a few basic macroeconomic aspects or theories, right? Okay, so when I say the word economics, what comes to your mind? Right? Can you put some thoughts that come to your mind in the chat box? Is it not? I've shared the slides. මුකුත් පේන්නේ නැහැ කියලා message එකක් එවලා තියෙනවා. Can you not see?
Course outlet නම් මිස් පේනවා.
ඒක තමයි පෙන්නේ. ඒක තමයි පෙන්වන්නේ. හරි? Right. හරි. When I say the word economics, what comes to your mind? Right. So no answers. Does that mean that nothing comes to your mind? Right. Good. Business environment. What else? Yes. So what things that come to your mind might depend on where you work, what you study, on different factors. For some of you, you might think of, especially with the situation in the country, you might think of the crisis, you might think of recession, you might think of prices going up, which we call as inflation, because it's out there on the news. You talk about it on a daily basis. The pricing increases, you're not having a proper business environment to work in, taxes, it's a huge problem today. So you might think of a lot of things when I say the word economics, right? You might think of stock market, you might think of currency exchange, trade, what else? Money printing, right? The central bank. But there is a formal definition for economics, but very simply, right? So all these things, we do study all these things under economics, but very simply, under economics, what we study is economics is all about making choices in the face of scarcity, we say, right? It's all about making choices. So be it an individual or a firm or the government, for example, now take an individual, right? Yourself. So you have to think of, we make choices every day on a daily basis, right? So this morning you have to decide whether to come to this class or whether you're going to go to work or whether you're going to wake up early. All these things are choices, and each choice comes with a cost, right? So for a business, it's the same. A firm or a business might have to think of what to produce, right? How much to produce, how to price the product, right? So given the condition in the country, you might have to make drastic choices that you have not made before. So for a state, for a government, it's the same, isn't it? You have to think of, how to reduce unemployment. How do we control the price? How do we control money supply? So all these things are choices that we have to make. Like I said, be it an individual, or if you go to a supermarket, unlike those days, you have to think of, whether I'm going to buy the same amount that I used to buy earlier. If I have 1,000 rupees in hand, what am I going to buy? In what quantities? So all these are choices. It's all economics, right? So we say that economics is all about making choices in the face of scarcity. So there is a formal definition for economics, economics, we say, is the study of how individuals and societies make decisions about ways to use scarce resources to fulfill wants and needs. So the words that I've highlighted or underlined are very important because we are talking about how individuals and societies, right? It could be an individual, it could be a firm, it could be the government. How do they make decisions about using scarce resources? The problem is that if you have an abundance, if you have unlimited amount of resources, it's not a problem. අපිට ඕන තරම් සල්ලි තියනවා නම් budget එකක් නැතුව ඕන තරම් සල්ලි තියනවා නම් ඕන තරම් resources තියනවා නම් we don't have to make choices, right? You can buy whatever you want, you can consume whatever you want. But the problem is scarcity. So it's about making decisions in the face of scarcity or to use scarce resources to fulfill wants and needs. Now, wants, needs is like, they're one thing. Needs, we all have needs. We need food, the basic necessities. We need shelter, we need water. Apart from that, as humans, we have loads of wants, isn't it? If you buy a car, you might want a more luxurious car, better car, a more comfortable car, better house, right? So we have wants. If you buy I mean, even if when it comes to food and clothes, even if you don't want it, you still buy things. So we don't stop at needs. We have wants. There's a difference. So that's why we have to make choices on how to use our scarce resources to fulfill both our needs and wants. Right. So broadly, economics is broadly categorized into two disciplines, right? So when you study economics, we study two disciplines broadly, but under these disciplines, there are several sub-disciplines and more disciplines are coming up. But broadly, we talk about microeconomics and macroeconomics, right? Micro and macro. So what's the difference? So when you talk about the economy, right, good. So when you talk about the economy, what are the entities that you can see? The smallest economy is the smallest unit or the entity in the economy is the individual, right? So the individuals or the households, we say. Right? So we live in households. So the smallest unit that we're going to look at in an economy is the household, right? Then there's another slightly bigger entity which we call as a firm, right? Businesses, firms. What else is there in the economy? So around that we have the government, isn't it? The government. So we talk about the involvement in the government. And apart from that, we do trade, or we have agreements, we do certain transactions. So there's money going out, goods coming in, money coming in and goods going out, goods and services. And then there's the international community, right? The international community. Right. So there are so many entities that we talk about under economics. So the study of the smallest units in the economy, which are the households and the firms, right? These two. The study of these two is called microeconomics. So you can see the word micro here, the smaller entities. We talk about how individuals or households or firms make decisions in terms of consumption and supply, right? Production. So that's called microeconomics, how individuals make economic decisions, right? So, and then we come to macroeconomics, macro, the bigger picture, isn't it? The larger picture. So in the larger picture, we talk about how the government will get involved, how the state gets involved in these transactions. We know that the government produces, then they purchase, right? What else do? They will take care of the money supply. What else? Policy making. The activities of the central bank, where then we also have to talk about the overall economy, how the economy functions, right? The growth, the GDP or the gross domestic product, taxes, the international trade, right? Exports, imports, the money deficit, inflation has to be controlled. So all these things, the bigger picture will be studied under macroeconomics. Right, so in this module, we will focus more on microeconomics and we will try to discuss a little bit on macroeconomics as well. Right, then these are the two broad disciplines, micro and macro, but under micro and macro, using the same principles to study or specialize in certain other we say subdisciplines, right? Like some economists, but the theories don't change, but some economics will specialize in labor economics, some economics in financial, some economics will specialize in environmental economics, some in energy economics, right? So likewise, there are lots of subdisciplines coming up these days, and people specialize in different areas of economics, but using the same micro and applying the same micro and macroeconomic principles. Right? So in this module, we are looking at those principles, and then later on, when you specialize or when you study economics further, you can specialize in a field that interests you. Right. So coming back to the definition of economics, we say economics is a social science. So economics is categorized as a science. Right? So why is it called a science? And again, it's a social science. Right? Economics is a science. It's a social science. Why is it a science? So if you have studied science for your A levels, biology, chemistry, physics, as most of us must have done, we learn the characteristics of a science, right? Science is the characteristics of beginner, right? So for example, you should be able to replicate an experiment and get the same results if you do it several times. So likewise, economics is also a science, and it goes, there's a basis, those characteristics can also be applied to economics to some extent. It's a social science. Why? Because we study how humans make decisions, right? How humans make decisions in terms of using resources. For example, on a daily basis, we have to use different types of resources. We use financial resources, money, we use human resources, or we give our labor, we give our cognitive skills or skills. Then we use natural resources, food for timber, fish, minerals, oil, petroleum, and so on. So it's about how humans make decisions, right? So at the end of the day, humans are the ones, people make decisions in terms of using these resources. Decisions humans or people. Therefore, we talk about how humans make decisions. So therefore, economics is a social science, right? And we assume that people are rational, right? Api rational decisions gannawa kiyala hitagana thamai api me theories discuss karane. We know some people act irrationally, but overall, we say that we consider that people, or we assume that people make rational decisions. Right, so it's a science because it sets out to analyze economic behavior using scientific methods. So let's look at that in a little bit more detail. So economics is a science, or it's a scientific study. Why? So there are four key characteristics, right, or features of economics as a science. The first is the knowledge that you gain from economics should be based on evidence of observable phenomena, right? What does that mean? It means that whatever the decisions that we make is based on things that we can see, right? For example, we see the price is increasing, inflation, right? So that we can analyze that, right? We see taxes affecting the people in a very adverse way, very negatively. So we see that happening around us. So now, if you want to analyze the actual impact, right? So as economists, what we do is we try to analyze this effect, right? So you see prices increasing, but we can't just say any layperson, economics ඉගෙන ගත්තත් නැතත් ඕනම කෙනෙකුට කියන්න පුළුවන් අපිට පේනවා prices එන්න වැඩි වෙනවා කියලා. නේ monthly, let's say prices are increasing of goods and services. So, but as economists, if you were to make a decision, you would take data, you would collect data, or you would take data from reports. There's data on goods and service prices from central bank, from if you don't trust the local sources, you can get data from the Food and Agriculture Organization. There's World Bank data. So, and there's data that you can take from Census Department of Sri Lanka, and then you can analyze if this is actually true, right? We can see the prices increasing, but does it have an actual negative impact on the people, right? So we make decisions on things that we can see, evidence of observable phenomena. The second one is replicable and objective, right? So like in the science, right? If you want to show that, plants absorb carbon dioxide. So to show that, you can do an experiment over and over, and they emit oxygen. So to do that, you can do an experiment over and over and show that this is true. The same way, we should be able to take samples, analyze the data, and show that what we are saying is true. If somebody claims that, the inflation goes up by 1% each month, so to show that, we can analyze data and show that this is true or not. So it's replicable, it's objective, right? If someone says no, we should be able to show, prove or disprove whether it's true or not. Again, those findings should be able to strengthen or falsify the claims that we make, and it enables us to predict, right? So we take data, we use methods, scientific methods. There are statistical techniques, there are mathematical techniques that we use, and using those techniques, there are software to analyze economic data. We use those techniques, models, right? We say economics work with models, right? As economics, there's a lot. The world is very complex, especially we know if you're working with humans, people decision making, the human decision making behavior. Humans are diverse, isn't it? Our perceptions when the way we work is very different from one another. Therefore, it's very complex. So doing economics, so economic modeling is very complex, but we try to simplify things. So we'll talk about this in the coming slides. It's very complex. So we say economists try to abstract reality. And reality ki tiyena හැමදේම අරගෙන අපිට model කරන්න බෑ. අපි key factors අරගෙන තමයි model කරන්න, because we work with mathematical models, statistical models. Therefore, we try to get the most important factors and try to analyze the economic behavior that is happening around us, right? And you are able to predict. Then අපි මේ ගන්න data වලින් predict කරන්නත් පුළුවන් අපිට. For example, we can, if you're working in the plantation sector, we can predict the crop production in 2 or 5 years' time, right? Or we can predict what would happen to crop production with the changes in the prices. With the change in price, what would happen to labor efficiency or technical efficiency. We can predict what would happen with the temperature or climate change impact. So those things also can be modeled in economics, right? We know the rainfall is changing, rainfall patterns are changing, the temperature patterns are changing. Therefore, we can predict with these models, we can show how the crop production would change, how the prices would change, what would happen to the people, households or firms if we increase the tax, right? So likewise, you are able to predict with these models. So that's why economics is called a scientific study. Right. Any questions up to now?
Excuse me, madam, what is meant by green economics?
Okay, so green economics is a good question. What do you think is meant by green economics when you see the word green?
We to reduce wastage.
Very good. What else?
To make it sustainable.
Sustainable. So you have the answer there, isn't it? So green economy is actually, green economy is also one word. There are so many other words that you might come across these days. The circular economy, green economy, sustainable economy. It's all about making the consumption and production sustainable, right? Sustainable meaning we use whatever we need now, but making sure that we keep or we save some or save resources for the future so that, this going into the future, right? We don't exhaust all the resources now. So to do that, we adapt or we try to apply certain green practices or sustainable practices in consumption, in production, and so on, right? Reduce waste is one thing. Green technologies, smart agricultural practices, right? That sort of doesn't affect the environment too much. So you can think of a lot of green practices in order to make production and consumption sustainable. Did I answer your question?
Okay, madam, thank you.
Yeah, and also sharing, sharing good practices, sharing our resources. So just Google circular economy. That will also give you some idea.
Thank you, madam.
Okay. So economic questions. Again, when it comes to economic questions, now we can talk about, okay, be it a firm or a government or a state or an economy, we have to answer these three key questions, isn't it? So if you take a firm will have to decide what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. So similarly, the economy or the government, let's say, will also have to decide what to produce, right? Are we going to produce only food inside, right? Are we going to produce both food and clothes? Or are we going to just stick to food and then import clothes from another country, right? So what to produce is a question that we have to answer. Then how to produce, how to manufacture. Then for whom to produce, right? How to produce, for example, in a plantation, you might have to think about whether you're going to use labor, if there's an abundance of labor. So you go for a labor-intensive cultivation, or whether you're going to mechanize your plantation or your farm. So how you're going to produce it. Then for whom, whether you're going to produce it to the local people, to your area, or you're going to go for exports. That's something you'll have to decide. So apart from these three questions, in some texts, you might find how much to produce, who gets to make decisions. Those are also important. But basically, we talk about three key questions, which are what, how, and for whom, right? So you can see we have to address these questions. And when we do address these questions, we are making choices, right? For example, what to produce? We have to make a choice. We're going to produce one good or service, several. So that's a choice that you'll have to make. Right. But the problem is what? So we know that we have to address these questions. The problem is scarcity, isn't it? So you have unlimited wants and needs, but limited amount of resources. So that's why, again, we have to make choices, and these choices we say in economics to trade off. Right? So I have the definition in Sinhala, right? සිංහලෙන් කියනවා නම් කිසියම් අවස්ථාවක ආර්ථිකයේ වෙසෙන මිනිසුන්ගේ අසීමිත වමනාවන්ට සාපේක්ෂව එම ආර්ථිකයේ සතු සම්පත් ප්‍රමාණවත් නොවේ. නම් සම්පත් ප්‍රමාණවත් නොවීම තමයි, that's the biggest issue, isn't it? We have loads of needs and wants, but a scarcity of resources. Right, so this word is also important, the word trade-off. Right, so what is trade-off? Right, so it says you can't have it all, so you have to choose how to spend your money, time, and energy. So these are the resources that are scarce. We don't have unlimited amount of money. The time is limited, energy is scarce or limited. So therefore, we have to make decisions on how efficiently we are going to use these resources, right? But however, if you are going for a choice, there's always a trade-off. Now, let's say that you go to the supermarket with with 500 rupees in hand, right? And then you have to buy two things. Let's say both cost 500. So you have to, there are two things to buy and you pick one. And then let's say now this is fruit juice. And this is fresh milk. So if you pick fruit juice, because you can only buy one with your 500 rupees, you have to forego fresh milk, isn't it? So now there's a trade-off. So you don't get the value of the fresh milk anymore because you had to forego that choice. Instead, you chose to buy fruit juice. So fresh milk, the value, the benefits that you would have got from fresh milk, you had to forego. You don't get it anymore, right? So therefore, it's a trade-off. Right. So this trade-off leads to another important concept in economics, which we call as opportunity cost. So I'll give you a minute to read the slide. So what does it say? Opportunity cost is the value of the next best choice or the next best alternative. Right, so this cartoon or these pictures talk about you having two options. One, is you can either study till late night for an exam, or the other option is to sleep, right? If you go for the first option, if you choose to study until late, then you forego the benefits of having a good sleep, right? Or if you choose to sleep, then you forego the benefits of studying, right? So because you can't do you can do both at the same time, right? So you have to choose one. So similarly, if you go in this example, now you have to pick one, and then when you pick the first option, you forego the second option, right? So you don't get the benefits of the second option, and that's a trade-off. And this trade-off has led to a cost. The cost is the benefits that you would have received or you would have got from this fresh milk. You don't get that anymore. So that's a cost, isn't it? So let's take another example. Now, this morning, let's say you had two options. You had two options. You could, come and study economics. The second option is you could have done a job. You could have worked somewhere this morning from, let's say, 8 to 2. One option is to come and study economics with this diploma. The second option is to do a job which would have earned you, like, let's say, 5,000 for the day. But now you chose to study economics. So you had to forego this option, Up economics තෝරගත්තාම job කියන option එක අපිට නැති වෙලා තියෙනවා. So when you forego or when you lose this option, there's a monetary benefit that you had lost. May 5,000 අපිට ලැබෙන්නේ නැහැ. This we chose to go with economics. So now this is your opportunity cost. Opportunity cost. Right? Opportunity cost. OCS stands for opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is the value of the next best alternative or the choice. So if I ask you what is your opportunity cost when you select the first option, the opportunity cost would be 5,000 rupees. Right? Is that clear? So whenever you have two options and you choose one option, you lose the benefits of the other option, right? So you choose economics considering your costs and benefits, right? You weigh your costs and benefits and pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages. Like when you study economics today, you might not get the benefit today itself, but you might get the benefits in 1 year's time. But still, you chose to study economics because you know that the advantages outweigh the costs of the foregone opportunity or the option, right? Is that clear? Okay, can someone tell me if this is clear or not?
It is clear, madam.
Clear, okay, thanks. Right, then in economics, we talk about 4 factors of production, right? Land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. So what are factors of production? These are the resources that we use for production. So all the resources that we have around us have been categorized into these 4 categories. So all the natural resources could be gas, oil, trees, whatever, minerals, water, all the resources that you use for production, natural resources come under land, right? Then labor, could be physical labor or intellectual labor. Then there's capital, tools, machinery, factories. So again, when it comes to capital, we talk about 5 types of capital, although I have not included them here. But we talk about human capital. We talk about natural capital. We talk about financial capital, right? So there are different types of capital that come under the broad term capital. And then entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is very important. Have all the 3 resources: land, labor, capital. But if you don't have the right decision-making power, or decision-making ability that's going to affect your production. Okay? Entrepreneurship, or some people call it management, it's the ability to make or take risks, make the right decisions. Right? You have to invest time, invest natural resources, labor capital, and all in the face of risk and uncertainty to produce goods and services. So that's why you learn economics. That is why you learn different other subjects, so that it sort of equips you, or it supports you to make the right decisions on how to use these factors of production, how efficiently and effectively you can use these factors of production. Right? So this is the process of producing goods and services. We are all familiar with it. So you use the resources, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, the 4 factors of production. And then in a firm, you produce or manufacture these goods, you transform these factors of production into producing goods and services, right? So goods and services together in economics, goods and services, we call these two as commodities together. So throughout the course, I might use the term commodities, right? Commodities, it includes both goods and services. So goods and services are consumed by consumers. Right? Consumers could be the end consumers, it could be businesses, whoever. These goods and services are consumed by consumers. So what are goods and services? Goods, we know, are material things, are tangible things, we can say. We can feel goods, and they can be touched and seen. They are, and whereas services are non-material things. Right? What are examples of goods and services? Very simply, a book, a laptop, a phone, they are all goods, isn't it? Services are intangible. You can't feel them, or you can touch them rather. But the service of a doctor or a dentist or a waiter, barber, so those are services, and we know what services are. So in the economy, we find both goods and services. So overall, we'll call them commodities. Right. So depending on who owns these factors of production, right? Who owns the factors of production, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, and who makes decisions in terms of addressing these 3 questions. Yeah, right? Who addresses these questions? What, how, and for whom? Who addresses these questions? And who owns the land? Who owns these factors of production? Depending on these 2 factors, economists have categorized economic systems that we see around you into 4 types of economic systems, right? So very briefly, one is, there was a traditional economic system, isn't it? A barter system, for example. People exchange goods and services for other goods and services. We don't have money involved, but you exchange goods for goods or goods for services and so on, right? And after Huamaru system, it's a traditional economic system, like in the case of a barter system, right? But you would still see in certain areas this is practiced, again, like when you talk about green economy, when you talk about circular economy. Now these types of barter system to some extent is encouraged, like sharing your seeds if you are an agricultural community, sharing food, right? Using your raw material or your wastage as a or let's say the byproducts of a certain industry or certain production as an input to another industry, Likewise, so these things are also important in to some extent for sustainable management, right? So barter system. And then these are the 3 key types of systems that we are going to talk about that you see around us. The command economy, right? I'm sure you're familiar with this name. Command economy is an economy where the central government will answer the three questions that we talked about earlier. So they will make decisions in terms of what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce. And they also, the government also either owns all or majority of the resources are owned by the government. So that type of economy is called a command economy, right? So you can see a few examples on the side. The countries had a command economy to some extent. So what are the characteristics you see in this type of economy? Mainly, there's not a lot of choices because the government will decide what the people want. So not a lot of choices, and they will make decisions on consumption and supply. Right. And then we move on to the other extreme, capitalist market. So it's like a continent. So you have on one end, you have the command economy, and then on the other end, you have the capitalist or the market economy. So the opposite, right? In this type of system, the private sector and the consumers and the producers will have the freedom to address three questions: what, how, and for whom, and also they will own majority of the factors of production. Therefore, there's a lot of choice, freedom, diversification, differentiation in products, goods and services. Therefore, it is much more versatile. So private property rights, wide variety of choices, limited government involvement in this case, right? And in the middle, you would see a mixed economy, right? Economies that has the characteristics of both, to some extent, the government, there's a considerable level of government involvement, right? For example, and also the private sector. Private sector, they will own a certain amount of resources, and they do have the freedom and the choice to make choices. So the private sector will choose what to produce, how much to produce, their prices, and also the consumers will have their choices. They also have a say, right? They will their demand will drive the production, and what else? And at the same time, the government will also come in. They also make certain decisions in terms of their key responsibility is to protect both the consumers and the producers. So they can decide on the price mechanism. They can decide on price controls. They can decide on taxes, or quotas or subsidies. They can give transfer payments like samuddi for consumers. So likewise, the government will also have a say in this type of an economy. So you see a lot of the time is what you see around us are mixed economies, like in the case of Sri Lanka. Right. So just for your knowledge, we'll talk very briefly on two economists that we need to know when you study economics. One is Karl Marx. I'll give you a minute to read the slide. So Karl Marx is a 19th century German economist, and he is the author of Das Kapital, or the Communist Manifesto. And when this book gave rise to a lot of revolutions at the time. So he spoke about revolutionary socialism and communism. So at his time, it was the capitalist economy that was dominant. And he saw that during the capitalist economic, that era, the owners, there were two classes. There's a class system, right? If you are interested, you can read on his work and his book. So there he discusses about 5 stages of economic development. And one of the latter stages is where there are two classes, right? There's a class system, the owners and the workers. So he saw that these owners may use the workers like the workers would, the laborers would work as slaves, right? They didn't have a good pay. Their families were suffering. Their children didn't have good education. They didn't get a fair pay. There was no welfare at all, right? This welfare was totally ignored. So he's thought that this is not the way to go forward. And at the same time, the owners were making abnormal profit at the expense of the workers. So he wanted to abolish this system and move towards socialism, and then ultimately towards communism, right? The communism that we say is prevalent in the countries that we say are communist is not the actual communism that Karl Marx was talking about, right? So he wrote the book, which gave to a lot of revolution, especially in transforming towards socialism and communism. And then Adam Smith is very important because he is we call Adam Smith as the father of economics for a lot of reasons. He actually wrote the book called Wealth of Nations, which talks about how countries should accumulate wealth, or how countries can become rich, right? So it's very interesting if you, at least, there's a lot of YouTube videos and material on his thoughts, his work, his concepts, if you're interested. Scottish economist, and his book came out in 1776. And in his book, or in his work, his concepts, he talks about laissez-faire, right? The word I've highlighted here, laissez-faire, meaning he talks about invisible hand, right? He says government should stay out of business and just let the market demand and forces decide prices, so that both the consumers and the producers will be well off, right? Because the minute the government tries to sort of control the prices, that is going to affect both the consumers and the producers adversely or negatively. Therefore, the government should just let the demand supply forces work. And he also talks about how countries can accumulate wealth through specialization, right? For example, we know what specialization or division of labor is. If you take a factory, let's say a textile factory, some will be working on different parts of the cloth, different parts of the costume, for example, right? One would do the sleeves, one would do the buttons, one would do the packing. So division of labor can be applied to the country as well. So he talks about specialization, comparative advantage. So for example, rather than trying to produce everything inside the country, you can produce whatever the products that you have the lowest opportunity cost. So that's why opportunity cost concept is important. We හැමදේම produce කරන්න නැතුව opportunity cost එක අඩුම products රට ඇතුලේ produce කරලා you can consider importing. So when you specialize on that, for example, let's say you specialize in production of tea. Sri Lanka can specialize in production of tea. So you can produce normal black tea, different, and then you can add value to those different types of tea, and then you specialize. When you specialize, you become more efficient, doesn't it? So when you specialize in something, over time you become more efficient, and then if you have a surplus, you can export and make money, and rather than trying to produce so many other things, and then you can think of importing the other goods which you have a higher cost of production. And there are several other things. Those are the key aspects that Adam Smith talks about. So when you will learn economics further in your at degree level or postgraduate level, you use a lot of his theories to study international trade, for example, right? Why countries should trade, how countries trade, and so on. Right. Okay, so that's a sort of very brief introduction to economics. And now we will move into the core theories on demand and supply. Right, so it's 9:30. You can take like a 5-minute break, and we will meet at 9:35. Okay.
Recording stopped.
So this would be the second session. And so in the first session, we talked about,
Recording in progress.
so earlier we talked about the two broad disciplines, micro and macro. So from now on, we will be looking a little more deeper into microeconomics. So under microeconomics, we study how individuals, the smaller entities in the economy make decisions. So the smaller entities that we are going to talk about are the households or individuals. We have the households and the firms, right? So first, we are going to look at how individuals and households make decisions in terms of consumption. So here we are going to talk about consumption and production or supply, right? Supply and demand, right? So when you consume something, it creates a demand, and to meet that demand, there has to be a supply. So the demand will come from the consumers and the supply will come from the producers. So first we will focus on demand and consumption, right? So the two entities or the two forces in the market, the consumers and the producers. So first we will look at the consumer side in terms of demand theory and nature of demand. So demand of illuma, the quantity demanded, but what do we mean by the term quantity demanded? So quantity demanded or QD, now these notations are also important in economics because we will be using we work with a lot of models, so we sort of try to use these symbols to denote neighbors. So quantity demanded, Q subscript D or QD stands for quantity demanded. So quantity demanded is the amount of a commodity a consumer wishes to purchase. So if you go to the supermarket, you decide how much to buy today by looking at the price, for example, right? You decide whether I'm going to buy 200 grams of sugar or 500 grams of sugar or 1 kilo, right? So that decision would change with different factors, right? So quantity demand kilo, and at that price, right? The quantities that we buy or purchase will differ from person to person, right? So we are going to talk about this demand or the nature of demand at individual level, but when you study macroeconomics, we talk about aggregate demand and supply. Because ultimately, let's say sugar, so individual demands will add up and aggregate, and at macro level, macroeconomic aggregate demand or supply level, right? But now at microeconomics level, we are going to talk about individual demand, right? So just consider yourself, and you go to the supermarket, the amount that you purchase or the quantity that you demand, right, will differ depending on different factors. Now, what creates a demand? You have to have a desire to buy. Now, sugar, let's say, you have to desire, there has to be a need for you to buy it. And also you should have a purchasing power, right? You should be able to afford it. And if those criteria are met, then there's a demand for that particular good from you. So let's say, okay, determinants of demand. So what factors? Now let's say something like fresh milk, right? What factors would affect the demand of fresh milk, right? So you can either talk or you can send your answers in the chat box. Now tell me what factors would affect the demand for fresh milk. When you go to the supermarket, what factors would affect your demand for fresh milk? Fresh milk වල ඉල්ලුම ද බලපාන සාධක. Anyone? Ashan?
Madam, price of the milk.
Very good. Price of the milk. Very good. What else? Okay, now I'm just going to write it here. That's the number factor, one factor, isn't it? Especially these days, price of the milk. I'm going to call it P. P stands for price. What else?
Can we consider the quality of the milk?
Yes, quality. What else?
Availability in close proximity or something?
Yes, distance or proximity. That could affect proximity. Brand. Good. Yes. What else? Right. So there are more answers coming. Yes, Ashan, good. Quality and quantity. Yes. Quantity is actually your demand. So quality. So yeah, the question is, I'm asking you what would affect the quantity that you purchase or what quantity that you demand. So quality, price, proximity, brand. And here is a list that I have made. Right, so the first and foremost, we would all consider the price of the product, right? And in economics, we call it the own price, right? Price of the product. Then what about substitute prices, isn't it? Price of other products. So if you want to buy fresh milk and if you realize that the price has gone up by, let's say, another 300 rupees, so you would look for substitutes, isn't it? Now we might say the milk powder is more cheaper compared to fresh milk, or if there are any other substitutes that we can have instead of fresh milk. So price of other products, or we call it cross prices. Price of the product, definitely own price, then price of other products. What about consumer income, right? So if now with the tax, my income has gone down. So I would consider when I make purchases, I would have to think about it, right? My income will definitely have an impact on the quantity that I demand. So consumer taste and preferences. Consumer taste and preferences, definitely, isn't it? Now, for example, you might have had an affinity for sugary products 10 years ago, but not anymore. Your taste and preferences will affect your demand. Then state of weather, if it's a very hot day sunny day, you might demand more cool stuff, ice creams, for example. Right? If it's rainy season, there'll be a higher demand for umbrellas or raincoats. The state of weather. Active state, very important, right? Government rules, regulations, advertising, standards, taxes, subsidies, right? The standards, food quality. Because we all remember what happened with the oil issues, and then the coconut oil issue with the SLSI. So you would trust the government. So there's a whole, like I said, when you study economics further, there's a whole, you study about the economics of information, and ideally you want to trust the government. You want to trust these government agencies. If somebody says, if the products say it's a green product, or if there's a green label, right? You want to trust. But for example, if you see the word organic written on it, you tend to, if you are very health concerned, then you might want to pay an extra amount and buy an organic product. But can you actually trust the label, right? Who would have authorized the label? Can you verify the details? So that would affect your decision to purchase. Yeah, so because there's a lot of greenwashing, we say. Greenwashing is, it says organic, but it's not really organic. So that we call as greenwashing in economics. So, right, so active state, subsidies, standards, taxes, definitely. We know how adversely it is affected. It's a good thing, taxes, but yeah, so we'll talk about taxes, but it will have an impact on the consumers as well as the producers. But since we're talking about the consumers, taxes will increase the prices. So as a result, that will affect the demand or the quantities that we purchase. Rules and regulations. What else? Various sociological factors: age, gender, level of education, experience. Those things will not affect whether you are married or not. For example, if you ask a family person or a married woman, so you might expect them to have a higher purchase or higher demand of for healthier products. So likewise, so there's a lot of factors that would affect, right? For example, if with education you gain some knowledge on the nutrition, on the health consumption and production. For example, if you're very altruistic towards the environment, if you feel for the environment, you might not want to consume maybe livestock, right? Meat products, because there is a big impact on climate change, right? From meat production, and also if importation can also have a increase your carbon footprint. So if you're very much concerned about the environment, your demand for certain goods might reduce, or environmental friendly or healthy products will increase. So there's a lot of things out there. I've only listed a few key factors that we are going to talk about in the coming slides. So apart from this, so we talked about this earlier, we are looking at human decision-making behavior, right? So when you work with humans, they are very diverse. We assume rational, but there are irrational people as well. So there's a lot of assumptions that we make, and also the world is very complex. People are very complex. So as economists, we try to sort of focus on the key factors, right? So now these are the key factors, but apart from them, but you gave me a few other factors like brand and so on, proximity. So those things will also affect, but we are going to sort of focus on some key factors here, right? So අපි මේ තමයි determinants of demand නැත්නම් ඉල්ලුමට බලපාන සාධක කියලා අපි consider කරන්න යන්නේ ඉස්සරහට. Right? So we'll see from these also, from this list, we will pick a few, like 3 key factors, and we will see how these factors affect the demand. Right. So I said in economics, we take decisions or we make inference using certain statistical mathematical techniques, right? So we work with models. So if you want to do an analysis, for example, let's say you want to analyze the demand for fresh milk. Now, you gave me some factors and I've listed some factors here. How do you analyze the demand for fresh milk? After fresh milk demand over the years make a වැඩි වෙලාද අඩු වෙලාද කියලා බලා ගන්න ඕන නම් you might want to analyze the demand. So to do that, we are going to use models. So here you have a set of factors or determinants that affects the demand. And I'm going to write all these factors as a model, as an equation, right? We call this the demand function, right? I've written all these factors as a function or an equation, and it's called a demand function, and we call it a multivariate function because these factors will vary together and also separately, right? For example, now here, that's why I said these notations are important. Now price I've written as Pn, prices of other products P1 to P2 and so on. Consumer income denote karna Y කියලා, taste and preferences TT, state of weather WG, sociological factors, or we call it social demographic factors or sociological factors are SP. Right, so you have on the left hand side, you have the quantity demanded. Quantity demanded is a function of all these different factors, right? Price, income, taste, and so on. Sociological factors, government intervention, so on. So if you want to analyze the demand for fresh, we can collect data for quantity. We can go to people, ask each and every one, how much of this product would you purchase? And the prices, of course, we can find from statistics department, or like I said, the World Bank or central bank data. The prices will be there. Income also we can take from reports, or you can ask people using a questionnaire, and you can collect data, right, for the quantity and all these factors. F stands for function. Function may factors mata depend on quantity demanded. So quantity demanded of fresh milk will depend on these factors, right? For example, when the price changes, the quantity demanded will change. When your income changes, your quantity demanded will change. Likewise. Now, like I said, you will collect data and use a software package to analyze the data that you collect, and you can find the demand for fresh milk. And when you find the demand for fresh milk, you can talk about how these factors affect demand. You can talk about what would happen if the government increased the tax by 5%. What would happen to the quantity demanded? අඩු වෙනවද වැඩි වෙනවද කියන එක අපිට මේ මොඩල් එක දිහා බලලා කියන්න පුළුවන් ඊට පස්සේ. And then what else? What would happen with the increase in age? Age එකත් එක්ක means මේ respondents age demand එක age එකත් එක්ක quantity demanded fresh milk purchase එක වැඩි වෙනවද නැද්ද? Age එක වැඩි වෙනකොට. So all these things you can determine by looking at this model. You collect data, you analyze the model, and from the results that you get, you can even predict, right? What would happen to fresh milk demand in 2 years? එහෙම ගන්නවා නම් අපිට මේකට time factor එකක් දාගන්න. එහෙමනම් we have to collect data for the last 20 or so years, and then we can predict what would happen next year, right? What else? Yeah, so likewise, we can estimate this demand function and get the results and talk about how these factors affect the demand. Right, so now we are going to talk about we're going to take three key factors from this model. Its own price, prices, its own price, prices of other products, or cross prices, and income, right? So these we'll keep these away for the time being, but these are important factors. But just as we are studying principles of economics, we will try to figure out how we estimate the impact of these factors, right? So let's first look at its own price. එයාගේම price එක. Now I'm taking fresh milk as an example. It could be a good or a service, right? Make a commodity a good, service. Now here, we'll talk about how the quantity demanded of fresh milk changes or varies with the price of fresh milk. එයාගේම price එක වෙනස් වෙනකොට එයාගේම quantity එක කොහොමද වෙනස් වෙන්නේ? Right. So now we are going to look at the demand schedule and the demand curve. Right. So demand schedule is very simple. It's a numeric tabulation. So we very simply have a table, the prices and the quantity demanded. Now in this table, you can see in the first column, you have prices, 0, 5, 10, likewise, and the quantity, the corresponding demand or quantity demanded by the consumers. So have a look at this table and tell me if you can identify a certain pattern. The quantity demanded is 40. Quantity demanded is 40. Again, if I might use purple, green, and so on. If you have trouble seeing any of these colors, let me know, right? Yes, very good, Cicely. Now, when prices increase, the demand will decrease. So let's have a look at that. Yeah, yes, Ashan. Cheaper the higher, cheaper the good, higher the quantity demand, isn't it? Right. So when it's not priced, people demand 40 units of a particular good. Right? Make good 40 units demand karna. Now, when the price goes up to 5, you can see the quantity demanded slowly decreasing, 10, 18. Now, when it goes up to 35, and the quantity demanded goes down to 4 units, right? What do you see here when the price increases? Quantity demanded, QD, quantity demanded, decreases. So isn't this what we see when it comes to our daily consumption, right? Or purchase. When you go to the supermarket, if then the prices are greater, or when the prices go up, the quantity demanded decreases. So so this is the gist, sort of. This is the theory behind demand. When prices increase, the quantity demanded decrease. But there are exceptions, which we won't be studying at this level, but there are exceptions. We call them, there are certain things such as given goods, right? The prices increase at the same time, the demanded will also increase. Some are luxury goods, right? Because like wine or luxury cars, when the prices increase, there will be greater demand because there's a niche market or a separate segment purchasing that type of goods. So there are different types of goods where which does not sort of follow this theory. Price එක වැඩි වෙනකොට quantity එක demand අඩු වෙනවා කියන නෙවෙයි. Price එක වැඩි වෙනකොට සමහරකට quantity එමෙතන demand එක වැඩි වෙන goods උත් තියෙනවා. But we are not going to talk about those. Instead, we are going to focus on the normal goods where the when the price increases, the quantity demanded decreases, right? But if you're interested, you can always read up on them. Right. So why does this happen? So if I draw this on a graph, the price and the quantity. So when the price is 0, the quantity would be somewhere there. When price is 35, quantity is somewhere here, isn't it? Right. So if I draw a graph, if I plot all these dots and I draw a graph connecting these dots, sorry, I missed one, but that's all right. Assume that these dots are on the line. Right, so I draw a curve connecting these dots, all these points, yeah? So 0, 40, likewise. And this curve is called the demand curve. And I'm price and quantity access data data graph plot connecting line connect. Then now this curve is called the demand curve. This is called the demand curve, which shows the relationship between price and quantity. Its own price and quantity. Price and quantity. The relationship curve demand curve. So you can see when the price increases, demand decreases. So there is a theory behind this, right? We would want to know why does this happen? Price purchase. So to understand the theory behind this, we have to learn the concept of utility, right? Concept of utility. Now, in economics, utility, the word utility stands for, you all know what utility means. It's in English. So very simply, it's satisfaction, right? Satisfaction. So satisfaction in economics is called, the economists have given the term utility to denote or to talk about satisfaction. Now, I would go to the supermarket and buy an ice cream because it gives me a certain level of satisfaction. Because the satisfaction level in the mama ice cream purchase karna pay satisfaction satisfaction we call it utility, right? That's simple. It's called utility. So economists have quantifying the utility. Now, when you talk about quantifying, now in economics, it's very important to quantify things, right? How do you measure satisfaction? Now, I eat an ice cream, and if you ask me what's the satisfaction, how can I tell? Right? I can say, okay, it's good, or it's not that good. It's very qualitative, isn't it? So it's important to quantify this. Quantify numerical value. So satisfaction, now if you take the distance, you can measure using kilometers. Water, liquids, liters, milliliters, cubic meters, the height, meters, feet, whatever, there are units. But for satisfaction, there's no unit, right? So economists have thought of two ways of quantifying satisfaction or utility. One school thought is cardinal utility. Cardinal, the other one is ordinal utility. Now, under cardinal utility, they have introduced a unit called utils. Now, this is a relative measure, utils. It's a relative measure. Now, for example, here, utils, right? I could say this car, which is worth 5,000 pounds, is worth 5,000 utils. Up to a simple now I could say one ice cream gives me 5 utils of satisfaction or utility. Happy utils scale relative 5 utils. And now I could say if I eat 2, it gives me 10 utils of satisfaction. Likewise, right? So cardinal utility measures utility or satisfaction using a term or a unit called utils. Then the second approach. First is cardinal utility. Second approach is ordinal utility. Now the name gives you a clue that we are ordering the utility, right? Ordinal. You order. Now I might ask you to give you 4, let's say, types of food or beverages. Let's say fresh milk, coffee, tea, and fruit juice, right? And if I ask you for your utility, you can order them. For example, okay, I might say for me, first is coffee, then tea, then juice, and fresh milk. So I have ordered it according to my preference, but your preference might be different. Maybe you like tea first, and this, and this, and that. Then, so you can see each of us will have different utilities, satisfaction from each of these beverages. So accordingly, you can order them. So that's called ordinal utility. Now, using these ordinal and cardinal approaches, we can measure utility, right? But this is just very briefly on what utility means. Now, let's take a numerical example, right? Okay, so now just ignore the third column for the time being and just look at this table. In the first column, you have the number of classes, and the second column, you get the total utility. Right, so just have a look at these two, the first 2 columns only, and see if you can sort of identify a pattern. Right, so let's try to take another simple example, or even this. Right, so in the first column, you see the glasses of water. Yeah, so that's good, that's right, Shan. But for the time being, we are not going to consider the marginal utility, but we're only going to talk about total and this two, okay? But we'll come to marginality in a minute. So in the first two columns, just focus on the first two, right? So you have first you have the number of classes. When you okay, let's take a person who has actually been running for some time. Let's imagine that you have been running and 0 water, 0 utility, of course, no satisfaction. But let's say now you're very thirsty after the run and you get the first glass of water, right? First glass of water you get. And you ask that person to tell you the amount of satisfaction or the utility, right? I'm going to use the term utility from now on, utility, and that person would say, okay, I get 15 utils of utility, 15. And then you give that person, you give the second glass. So when you get the second glass, now let's imagine that it's a very hot day and then you crave for you crave ice creams, right? You crave ice cream and then you get the first ice cream and you feel a lot of satisfaction, right? Utility it's very high satisfaction. That's the first ice cream you get on a hot day. So let's say you get like 10 utils of satisfaction. ice cream, okay. Ice cream so if you give me another ice cream, I don't get the same amount of satisfaction, right? But you can still eat, you still want ice cream. So my satisfaction is going to be a little less than the first one, right? Third ice cream. Again, it has gone down to about 6, right? Now I get the fourth one and now it's really low. Now it's about 2. Right? Because you can't keep eating ice cream. You lose satisfaction, right? You lose utility. And you keep doing that. Ultimately, if you get so many ice creams, you can even fall sick, right? If you eat too many ice creams. So that is going to be a dissatisfaction for you. So similarly here, you get the first glass, you get 15 units of satisfaction. You get the second glass, the total utility. This is actually the cumulative or the total utility. Now it's like this. You get the first class 10, second class 8. The total utility here, when you get the second class, would be 8 plus 10 is 18. Right? So likewise, here you get 25. Total utility, the muli satisfaction keeps increasing. The muli utility when you consume a glass each time. 5th class 37, 6th class 7th class 8th then you get the 9th class. Then 9th class you might fall sick, you might not want to drink. It's a displeasure, a dissatisfaction now. So this utility now your satisfaction is going down, right? Class and when you have the 9th class, this goes down to 40, right? 10th class, even less, right? From 40 to 39. Now what has happened here? Now we look at this third column, marginal utility. Now this term marginal is very important in economics. You will see as we study other lessons. This factor marginal or this term marginal comes in a lot because we make decisions, we say at the margin, right? Marginal utility, marginal cost, marginal production. We price at the margin. So anyways, now here, marginal utility. Margin. Now look at this column. What do you see? Now 0, of course, 0 utility, 0 marginal utility. Now when you get the first class, your total satisfaction increases by 15 units. And marginal utility. And when you consume one extra class, 0 to 1, Ekendra dekata වැඩි 1 to 2 and your total utility has gone up to 25. So this difference මේ දෙක අතර වෙනස වෙන්නේ 10යි. එහෙනම් the margin or the marginal increase is 10. Your utility has gone up by 10 units, right? When you consume an extra glass, when you consume an extra glass, your utility increases by how many? Here, from 15 to 25 by 10 utils. So that's called marginal utility, your additional utility. When you consume one extra glass, your total utility increases by 4 units, right? 4 units. 5, what am I doing? Increases by 2.5 units. So you can see, as you increase the number of glasses, your total utility also increases up to a certain point, up to this point, and then it decreases. And that's why, therefore, the marginal utility becomes negative. Now you can clearly see this if you plot this on a graph. If you have the total utility and the marginal utility on this axis, and if you have quantity of water, or we call it W, W stands for water, glasses. You start at 0, 1, 2, 3, likewise up to 10 glasses, and I can plot the total utility. Now we saw that it keeps increasing. Your total utility increases, comes to a maximum, and then it goes down. That's your total utility. And it reaches the maximum at the 8th glass. So here, this will be your 8th glass, and afterwards your total utility decreases. What about marginal utility? Marginal utility is the difference between the total utility values here. So if I use a different color, what has happened? Okay, whoever has the microphone on, can you switch it off, please, Hiruni? Right, so marginal utility would look something like this, and you will see, sorry. Right, so I have only plotted the total utility function, and then let's plot the marginal utility. Now, if you draw the total utility and the marginal utility, your total utility function will look like the orange graph. There is the total utility, and this is the marginal utility. Marginal, the additional utility, third column, plot color, this one. So that is this gray line. You can see that it's going down, and this is very important. So you can see the marginal utility becomes this. When the total utility is at 0, the marginal utility becomes, sorry, when the total utility is at its maximum point, utility, at that point your marginal utility is here, isn't it? So this is important. When the total utility is at its maximum, the marginal utility is 0. Right. So now what else with this? Now we are trying to identify, we're trying to understand why when the price increase, we purchase less, right? Now we can see our total utility increases as we purchase more and more, but our marginal or the additional satisfaction that we get from each unit goes down, right? And it reaches a minimum and then 0, and then it goes into a negative side. And yeah, so another graph just for your understanding. So you can see the total utility increases, comes to maximum and decreases, then the marginal utility gradually decreases. Right, so in economics, we call this as the law of diminishing marginal returns. The utility gain from consumption of successive units of a commodity diminishes while having the consumption of all other commodities constant. Very simply, what it means is, as you consume one extra unit of a good, your additional utility decreases. So that's called the diminishing marginal utility. Right, so now we're trying to understand this price-quantity relationship. So to do that, we are going to consider two scenarios. One, what happens when the commodity is free. When the commodity is free. The other scenario is when the commodity is priced. So when the commodity is free, what happens? Now we say whenever a commodity is given free, there's no problem, we can reach the maximum. Right? We can reach the maximum total utility. And apita free denavana apita worry when one purchase karna amount gana. We can purchase any amount that we like until we reach the maximum satisfaction, right? So let's say now we reach the maximum satisfaction when we eat 5 ice creams. But if I don't have money, then I can't reach the maximum satisfaction, because although I want to eat more, I don't have the money to purchase 5 ice creams. So I will only have one, but that I have not met my maximum satisfaction. But if one is free, if things are free, if it's free, no problem. We don't have to worry about the budget. We can use the max. We can go up until the maximum total utility or the maximum total satisfaction. Then the second one is when things are priced. Now this is where the problems start, right? When things are priced. Now we have to decide where should you or how much should you purchase. Now, we are not going into detail on how to derive this equation, but there's an equation that we use. We say when things are priced, the optimum consumption comes where the price, if this good is X, I don't want to good deck up now, Px equals the marginal utility of that good. Marginal utility එකක price the unit price එකට සමාන වෙන තැන. Where the marginal utility equals the unit price of that particular good or service, right? Px, x can good දෙක අපි හිතමු. Any good, right? Any good. That the price of that good, one unit price අපි හිතමු එකක මිල රුපියල් 10යි නම් මේ 10ට marginal utility එක 10ට සමාන වෙන point එකේදී තමයි අපි consume කරන්නේ, right? Right. So you can do this work. You can work this out numerically. After example using equations, we can work that out. But we won't do that now. But okay, now so this is the equation: marginal utility equals price of X. Okay, I'll give you a minute to read this slide. Now, okay, we can work this out by substituting different prices. They have done a price ekai. We'll have price on this side and quantity on this side, right? So when the price is 0, we know that we can go up to a maximum utility, right? But if the price goes up to 5, right? Fourth class 4, right? When the price goes up to 5, let's say I have to make the price like a substitute color marginal utility made. You can find the marginal utility from this table, and then you will see that when the price goes up, this optimum point shifts. Price of a value when the value it will be somewhere here, right? Let's say 3. And when it's 10, the optimum point will move to this. Okay. So now this is 3 and this is 2, likewise. So you can see now when if I draw this graph, the price against quantity against price, you can see that it gives me a downward sloping graph, which we called as the demand curve. So you can see as the price increases, the optimum point of satisfaction reduces or goes down. Therefore, that's why when the price increases, we tend to purchase less, right? So now we've derived the demand curve. So therefore, from this point forward, we will talk about demand, because we know how to derive the demand curve. And now that's when you consume one product, right? One product. Water, now water, ice cream, just one product. And now we are going to talk about indifference curve. Right, so we are going to talk about our utility when you consume more than one good. So, a product. Now we're going to talk about our utility when you consume 2 goods at the same time, because we usually consume more than one, isn't it? You might have rice and water together. You might have rice and bread together. So likewise, we're going to look at consumption of 2 goods at the same time. So let's assume that for breakfast, you're having both bread and rice, right? So bread on one axis, rice on the other axis. Please, bread, rice, and just look at this graph on the right side. So the graph on the right is sort of a scatter plot. Now, what I've done here is, now, let's say I consume 1 unit of rice, plate එකක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. නැත්නම් හිතමු 1 spoonful of rice, any unit, මොන හරි එක unit එක rice and එක unit එකක් bread. ගත්තම අපිට හම්බෙන utility එක, right? I have plotted that, the utility that you get when you consume both together. Bread සහ rice දෙකම එකම වෙලාවට consume කරනකොට, එකට consume කරනකොට utility. And then I consume, because let's say I prefer more bread and I prefer bread more. So I consume more bread and another amount of rice. Or I consume, this is 2 and this is 3, this is 1 and this is 4. Or I consume 1 unit of bread and 4 units of rice because I prefer rice more. If you could do that, then you get a different level of utility. Then our satisfaction, consume quantities dependent on, right? Your satisfaction depends on the amount of bread and rice that you consume. Therefore, as you increase or decrease these quantities, your level of satisfaction is going to vary accordingly. So I'm going to plot these numbers. Now let's say when I consume 1 unit of rice and 1 unit of bread, I get two utils of satisfaction. එකයි තුනයි ගත්තොත් 3, right? හතරයි තව වැඩි amount එකක bread ගත්තොත් I get like 7. මෙතන 7. තවත් එකක් වෙනවා. I'm going to have 5 units of rice and 3 units of bread. 7. Somewhere here. Again, they'll give me 7. Now, can you see? You quantities වෙනස් කර කර අපි consume කරනකොට utility එක satisfaction එක වෙනස් වෙනවා. Right? So now what we are trying to do is I'm going to draw now these values in colors 4, 7, 2, 3 කියන්නේ utility values. Right? Now, if I plot a curve connecting the similar or the same utility levels, මෙතන 7 කියන utility level එක connect කරා. ඊපස්සේ 4 කියන level එකත් මම connect කරනවා. Just a little off here, but this is the same that it's the same. Okay, 4. Yeah. Here, if I, no matter or irrespective of the amount, the quantities of bread and rice, you still get the utility level of 4. Maker, you get a utility level of 7. Right? So you can see now, if I consume, now this, let's say I take one of these curves, make utility level 4. Now this is called an indifference curve. Why is it called an indifference curve? You are not different among the quantities. Quantities, you're different among the quantities. Mono quantity we consider. Now here you have these coordinates. These coordinates here. 8 units of rice, 25 units of bread will give me this amount of 4 units of satisfaction. 13 units of rice and 15 units of bread again will give me the same satisfaction, 4 units. 30 units of bread and 5 units of rice will give me the same amount of 4 units of satisfaction. Right, so mona bundle eka consume karat, right? Irrespective of the bundle, you would still get the same level of utility. So therefore, they are not different among the quantities that you eat along this curve. Make curve with kuda mona quantity consume karat. Make curve with kuda, you get the same level of utility, which is 4. So therefore, we call this the indifference curve. Indifference curve. Now, as a consumer, what would you want to do? As a consumer, I want to consume more and more, right? We say as rational consumers, we prefer more to less. More food, more clothes, more anything, right? So for breakfast, I might want to have more rice and more bread. rice more bread. Bread to if that happens, my utility now, the medika cross and is going to be the utility. So now that is somewhere away from this line here. Now, you know, price of rice. වැඩි කරනවා quantity එකෙන් rice වල plus price of bread එක පන් ගෙඩියක මිල වැඩි කරනවා quantity of bread. Right? එහෙනම් අපි එකක මිල හොයාගන්න පුළුවන්. Quantities අපිට හොයාගන්න පුළුවන්. Now we can draw this line. දැන් මේක rearrange කරලා මම bread සහ rice වලට මේ graph එක හදාගත්තට පස්සේ I can draw a graph like this. Okay, bread quantities වලට rice quantities ටික හොයාගෙන I can draw the budget line. Now this line, the slope of this line is the price ratio. Price of bread, so price of rice. We'll make a rearrange කරොත් so you have bread on this side. Sorry, this is budget. Yeah, budget එකට අපි වෙන letter එකක් දාමු. Otherwise, going to be confusing. So I'm going to call this Y. Y is the budget. Okay, got the budget. Take a Y. So now I want bread to come to this. So I'm going to have bread on this axis. So this is, you would have heard of Y equals MC mx plus C type of an equation because it's a linear function. So don't worry too much about these functions. I may rearrange කරලා මට ඕන විදිහට ඇඳ ගන්න ඕනේ. මට bread ඕනේ මේ side එකට, rice මේ side එකට ගන්න ඕනේ. So I have bread on this side. Mx, the slope would be price of rice over price of bread, and this is a negative slope. Hence, x can be x-axis එක එකට rice ගන්නවා plus c එක එනවා මෙතන මේ intercept එක. Right? So now once I rearrange this equation, I can see the slope is this. Price of rice over price of bread. එකට අපි කියනවා price ratio. Okay, price ratio එක තමයි මේක slope එක වෙන්නේ. Now I have a budget line. දැන් මගේ budget එකක් තියෙනවා. රුපියල් 1000යි මං ගාව තියෙන එක මං spend කරනවා on bread and rice. So I know my budget and I also know my wishes or quantities I want to consume of bread and rice. ඒක අපිට indifference curve එකකින් පෙන්නලා තියෙනවා. So now to find the optimum point of consumption given my budget, I'm going to draw both these curves, indifference curve and the budget line on the same graph. So this is what you see here is that I've drawn both curves on the same graph, right? And when these two, you can see that the budget line did not touch this curve. Make a touch කරන්නේ නැතුව උඩට ගිහිල්ලා it crosses sort of this curve here. Make a minimum point එක touch කරනවා. Second line එක අපි හිතමු utility level එක 4 මේකේ මේ utility level එක 10 කියලා. Right? And it can you can go up to the utility level of 10 with the given budget. Right? එහෙනම් මෙතන මේ slopes එක tangent වෙන තැන තමයි අපි කියන්නේ optimum point of consumption. ඊට පස්සේ අපිට හොයාගන්න පුළුවන් given this 1000 rupee budget, 1000 rupees නම් මං ගාව තියෙන්නේ prices උත් අපි හොයාගන්න ඕනේ. A prices වලට current market prices, given the current budget, this is how much you can consume. Right? This amount of bread, the bread units, the high. Price units high kilo. Right, now that's given my the budget that I have. But now I can do a little bit of simulation with this. Now I can see what would happen if my budget increases. My income එක ලබන මාසේ with an increase in income අපේ මගේ budget එක රුපියල් 2000කට වැඩි වෙනවා. Prices ඒ විදිහටම තියෙනවා. එහෙම වුණොත් මොකද වෙන්නේ? Right? එහෙම නැත්නම් budget එක වෙනස් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. Budget එක 1000යි හැබැයි prices වැඩි. That's what we are experiencing these days. Now the prices will go up. Right? Prices වැඩි වුණ ගමන් මොකද වෙන්නේ? You can see now this slope will be affected, right? Slope එක price වැඩි වුණොත් එහෙම slope එක steep වෙනවා. එහෙම නැත්නම් slope එක flat. So accordingly, this prices වෙනස් වීම එහෙම නැත්නම් budget එක වෙනස් වෙනවත් එක්කම this budget line will shift, right? එක slope එක වෙනස් වෙනවා. එහෙම වුණොත් slope එක අඩු වුණොත් මේතම මේක steep slope එක වැඩි වෙලා steep වුණොත් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට price of rice වැඩි වුණොත් price වල මිල වැඩි වුණොත් slope එක අපි දැක්ක steep වෙනවා කියලා. මේක වැඩි වෙන හින්දා එහෙම වුණොත් අපිට පේනවා මෙන්න මේක ටච් කරන්නේ මේ යට curve එක. Now if I draw another line, sort of I am trying to get this curve to touch. It's crooked, but oh, yes, that's a little better. So when the price of rice increases, this slope increases and it becomes steeper. Therefore, now you can see it touches this line, this curve. ඉස්සෙල්ලා අපිට තියෙන prices වලින් 10 වලට යනකම් යන්න පුළුවන් වුණා. But now, as the price increase of one good, your budget line has shifted to this side. You know, now your utility level is 4. So you can see how this changes when the market prices bread, rice, and a price or if your budget changes. Accordingly, the amount that you can consume changes. If your budget changes, it will shift this way. And if your budget එක වැඩි වුණොත්, අපි තුන් 1000 2000 වැඩි වුණොත්, you will be able to go touch a higher utility level. So likewise, you can see the price and the income will affect your consumption, right? So you see now these days as the prices increase, your budget line will be affected, and as a result, you will have to consume less and less of the goods that you purchase. Right, and now we are going to move into look at quantifying the demand, right? And it's going to be a little more interesting now. Right, any questions up to this point?
Recording stopped.
No. So in that case, I think we can take a break. Right, so I will have to finish at 2. So what we will do is we will take a sort of a long break and we will meet back at 12. Okay, so and then we'll finish it off. Okay, so do whatever, you can take a long break and we will meet at 12. Okay. There won't be any other breaks in between, but we will continue until. Okay, any questions? Okay, so see you in a while then.
Excuse me, madam, till what time you are conducting the program today?
I will go until about 1:45 to 2.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Right, so welcome back to this session. Yeah, so we have been discussing the demand, the utility, and the
Recording in
derivation of the demand
progress.
curve, and then we looked at indifference curve, when how you would show the utility when you consume more than two goods, and then we arrived at how to find the optimum amount of consumption, the optimum levels of consumption of when you consume two goods at the same time, right? So for that, we had to draw the indifference curve and the budget line, because we had to include, we had to consider the constraints that limit our consumption, which is our budget and the market prices of the two goods, right? Prices and the budget. So, and then we superimposed those two, we drew both on the same curve and found the optimum levels of consumption of two goods, right? So you can do the same when you do several goods at the same time, but we can't show using the manually. So we sort of study the principle behind this theory using just two goods, right? And now we are going to look at how certain factors affect the quantity demanded, which we discussed this morning. If you go back to the factors affecting demand here, so we discussed several factors. Now we'll take one at a time and consider, look at how these factors affect the quantity demanded and how the quantity demanded changes as these factors vary. Right. Right. So let's take percentage. Right. And then now we're going to talk about demand factors. So all other factors, now if you go back to the demand determinants, here, except its own price, here, this one, all other factors are called demand shifters, right? Demand shifters. Why? Let's see why. Right. So for example, taste and preferences, income, number of consumers, price of other products or cross prices, income expectations, all these factors would shift the demand curve. Right. So let's take an example. When you talk cross prices, we mainly consider two types of goods, right? Cross prices, we talk about substitutes and complements, right? So what's the difference? Can someone give me an example for a substitute? Anyone? Okay, so here's a good substitute: bread and rice, right? Tea and coffee can be substituted for each other. Fresh
Madam,
milk,
butter and margarine.
very good, butter and margarine. So those could be substituted for each other. So those are all substitutes, right? So when you when you consider the consumption or to purchase butter, you would, if the price has gone up, you would look for alternatives or substitutes, right? So therefore, we know that cross prices affect the demand of another good. Those are substitutes. What about complements? So ties and tubes are complements, isn't it? So we know that each other's prices would affect the demand of each other. What else can be a complement? Yes, I'm sure you can think of several examples for complements. So let's take the case of the substitutes. So now here, this example considers bread and rice, and we are told the prices of bread and rice are PB1 and PR1. The quantities are QB1 and QR1. So it's always easy. Sorry?
Phone and SIM card.
Yes, very good. That's a compliment. Right. So in the case of substitute, now here you're given two commodities, bread and rice. Now first look at the demand curve for rice on the right. Now what are we told? Right, so let's say that, okay, the question says now, this is the demand curve and this is the demand curve for rice. This is the initial demand curve. Just consider now this is the initial or the original demand curve for bread and the original demand curve for rice. So when you, since it's going to be an MCQ test, you won't have to draw graphs, but if you are trying to show the change, it's always advisable to show the original graphs using a notation. So D naught is the original demand curve for both products. Right. So now let's take rice. So rice, we are told that the price of rice increases. And the question is, if the price of rice increases, what would happen to the quantity demanded of bread? Quantity demanded of bread. What would happen? So when you get a question like this, the demand for rice. And so how would you explain this phenomenon? Original price of rice was PR1, and at that price, consumers would purchase QR1, right? At this price, consumers would purchase this much. And what would happen when the price increases? When the price of rice increases, what happens to the quantity of rice? We already know what happens now because it's a normal good. When price increases, the quantity of rice purchased, demanded, will decrease. You can see here, as the price goes up, that change takes place along the demand curve. In a price quantity line. So therefore, we can see that the quantity of rice has decreased. So from here, the quantity has gone down to this point, right? Calling 10 kilos, then 8, right? So the price, when the price increases, quantity decreases. So now the price of rice has gone up. Therefore, consumers would tend to buy more of the substitute. The substitute in this case is bread, right? So we are not told that the price of bread changes, or the price of bread rather is constant, and it doesn't change. Price of bread is constant. So price of bread is constant in the line making. We can show it using this horizontal line. Show that it's constant. In the short run, right? So this can change in the short or medium run, but in the short run, it's not going to change. It's constant. T naught. So at this price, PP की market price. So now this is not linear. This is not linear. You can see that they're all curved lines. But there is a change. When this goes down, there will be an increase in spread. So you can see now this is the demand shifter. Earlier, Yagami price check, it's its own price changes, the quantity varies across this curve, right? But when a price check, when a substitute price check, that would shift the demand curve. Right? So we say outwards or inwards or to the left or to the right. So what would happen if the price of price goes down? Okay, so I have a message. There's a message in the chat box saying that you can't hear me. Anyone have trouble hearing me? Because Shani, it might be your computer. Can you all hear me?
Yes, madam, I can hear. Maybe some problem of the signals, maybe.
Probably, Shani. So you'll have to check that. But anyway, I will upload this recording so you can go through.
Madam, are you uploading the presentation and the recording?
And the recording. The presentation is already on LMS. It's up there. But this I will upload the same link after the lecture.
Okay, thank you.
Recording. Okay, thanks. Right. So now what would happen if the price goes down? Price reduces. This it's going to be the opposite. So if the price goes down, you can see for the same price, people will buy more price and the demand for bread would decrease. And as a result, now the new quantity would be quantity. How do you find the quantity? It's the point where the price line crosses the demand curve. Right, so the new quantity, the price this much. Okay.
Madam,
Yes. That's the demand theorist neda. Quantity principles of economics normal goods behavior price quantity goods price quantity demanded but we don't consider those goods in this lesson. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Good. Right. So that's about a substitute. Now let's move to the case of a complement. Right. So let's consider a complement, sugar and tea. Right. So now take a minute and see if you can illustrate using a graph what would happen to, so tea and sugar are complements, right? You consume sugar with tea or tea with sugar rather. So here you have the price of sugar and quantity of sugar. And then the question is, if the price of sugar increases, what would happen to the quantity demanded of tea? Right. Right. So how would you show this or illustrate this using a graph? Now we first look at the quantity demanded of sugar. When the price of sugar increases, we know that would affect the quantity demanded of sugar. Price of sugar value according to the demand theory, the quantity demanded of sugar will go down. So that's what you see here in this graph. The original quantity of sugar was this much, let's say again 10. units at P1 මේක තමයි කලින් tip market price එක. When the market price goes up to P2 5 per kilo කියලා තිබ්බා. Now if it goes up to 10 price එක වැඩි වෙනකොට අපි දන්නවා quantity එක අඩු වෙනවා up to let's say 3 kilos per 3 kilos වලට අඩු වෙනවා. So now the other thing is in economics we assume now at this when you consider right, so there are so many factors that we discussed that affects the quantity demanded. Now each time when we consider one factor at a time, we assume that all other factors are constant. අපි assume කරනවා මේ given time එකකදී අපි එක factor එක අපි මුලින් discuss කරන්නේ එයාගේම quantity එකයි price එක නම් මේ ඉතුරු ඔක්කොම factors ටික all these factors are constant. They don't change, but we know that in reality that's not the case. Prices වැඩි වෙනත් එක්ක would change your taste and preferences, taxes, your other preferences, cross prices, all these things can change together in the real world. Market but since we are studying the principles, we are going to consider that all factors are constant. මේ වගේ කිසිම වෙනසක් නැහැ. prices තිබ්බ විදිහමයි. හැබැයි ඒ අපි සලකන fact එක විතරයි ඒ වෙලාව වෙනස් වෙන්නේ කියලා. right? So for example now, but if you are doing an actual demand estimation, we can vary all these factors because you will be using a package or a software to do the demand estimation. So when you do an actual demand analysis, you can actually vary all these variables or factors together. මේ වගේ අපිට interaction එක බලන්න පුළුවන් මේ දෙක අතර එහෙම නැත්නම් වෙන වෙන factors බලන්න පුළුවන් factors වල composite effect එකක්. So you can do anything with when you do it using a computer. But since we are trying to study the individual impact of these factors, we consider that all these factors are constant and at a given time only one factor will vary. Now we are looking at, because some might say, okay, but if there's no sugar, you can always consume something else instead of sugar. But that's not the case. We assume that you prefer sugar only. So if the sugar consumption goes down, that's going to affect the tea consumption. So we are not told that the price of tea, this is actually price of tea is constant, and originally this was the demand pulling consume kara tea 2 packs per month. Now with this change in demand for the same price of tea, now you consume only 1, right? And the tea quantity has gone down. Why? Because the price of sugar went up. As a result, the quantity consumed or continued demanded of sugar went down. Because there's no sugar to drink or consume tea with, you have to reduce the consumption of tea. So in the short run, the price of tea stays constant. Therefore, for the same price of tea, you can see the tea consumption went down. So that's how we show the relationship between complements, price and quantity, cross prices. Right? So now we looked at substitutes and complements under cross prices. So there's another factor. So cross prices covered. Now let's look at the third factor which affects the demand, your income. Right. Right, so have a read through the slide. Right? So it's no doubt that our level of income affects the demand, our demand for goods and services. So depending on or based on the amount of money you spend or the proportion of your income that you spend on certain goods, we can categorize goods into 3 types, like inferior, normal, and luxury. Right, so what's the difference? So for inferior goods, when your income, so we usually denote income in economics using Y. So when your income increases, the demand for this type of goods, quantity demanded for inferior goods, go down. So there's an inverse relationship, right? A negative relationship here. Income increases, your demand for that particular good decreases. Can someone give me an example?
Can we take rice, because there are different types of rice?
Yeah, that's a good example. So basically the brand, isn't it? Store brands, like if you when you have sort of in the low income category, you might tend to buy store brands or rice of a maybe a brand, right? But when your income increases, your demand for that brand decreases, right? And you tend to buy a higher or a more expensive brand, right? So that particular brand has become inferior. Is that right?
Yeah, madam, it's okay.
Okay, so that's a inferior relationship, or it's an inferior good rather, right? So from analogous phones to you tend to buy smartphones when your income increases or something like that. So yeah, they're called normal analog cell phones, isn't it? So anyways, so the idea is when your income increases, your quantity demanded decreases. Then normal goods. For normal goods, when income increases, the quantity demanded increases. So there is a positive relationship. Same goes for luxury goods. When your income increases, the quantity demanded increases. Again, a positive relationship. But for luxury goods, for you to buy, the portion of income that you spend is huge, right? So your income has to increase by a higher percentage, right? Just because my income increases from 10,000 to 20,000 doesn't mean that I can buy a luxury car, right? Or jewelry. So it has to increase by a certain amount. So when we talk about elasticity in the coming slides, we might be able to discuss a little bit more on this. So, right. But then there's a positive relationship between normal goods, income and quantity demanded for normal goods and luxury goods, right? Right, so now we are going to talk about elasticity of demand. Now, this is a very important concept in economics, elasticity, because we talk about elasticity of demand, elasticity of supply, elasticity of production, right? So what do we mean by elasticity? So elasticity, you can see, I mean, when we hear the term elasticity, we think of something stretchy, isn't it? Elastic. Elasticity is, we're looking at how elastic or how stretchy or how responsive is the demand for the change in certain factors. And we discussed several factors. We talked about its own price, cross prices, income, taste and preferences. So we look at age, things that, factors that affects the demand. But we know that these factors change. Prices increase, age increases, your education level, cross prices, income, these things vary, these factors. Now, as economists, we are interested in finding the change, quantifying the change in demand, right? Now, even if you don't study economics, you can still say when the price increases, you know, the quantity, you demand less of a quantity or a good. So, but we are more interested, or we try to sort of quantify this change, right? We can do that using elasticity formula. It's a very simple formula, but the idea behind is that we are trying to find out how concept is the change in demand to a change in any other factor. Right? So there are two types of, or two different methods of elasticity, point elasticity and arc elasticity. Now, in this lesson, we will only look at point elasticity. The theory behind arc and point elasticity are the same. So if you're interested, you can also read up on arc elasticity. Right, so let's take one factor at a time. Now, we are first going to look at elasticity. Its own price elasticity, we call it own price. Eagama price elasticity. Right, so if I write the equation simply, elasticity, now we use eta to denote elasticity, or some people write it as elasticity like that. Elasticity, own price elasticity, or price elasticity, we call it. AP, elasticity, its own price equals percentage change in quantity demanded so percentage change in any factor, right? Percentage change in any factor. If you're looking at its own price, it's going to be the price change. If you're looking at income, your denominator will have income there. Now, since we're looking at own price, I'm going to write its own price here, price. Now, if it's bread elasticity price of bread, right? So I can simplify this further. Percentage change, we write, change using delta. So percentage change in quantity demanded of bread to a percentage change in price of bread, right? So how do you find the percentage change? It's very simple, isn't it? If you know the initial price and the new price, it's the difference divided by the initial price. So for example, percentage change in bread, bread wala new price second, minus bread wala original price second, original price of bread times 100. So you can find the percentage change in quantity and the percentage change in price. So I simplify this further. So it's going to be the change in quantity of bread, if it's bread, to a change in quantity of price, so the original price times original quantity. Okay. So You can use, this is the elasticity. Version. So just make a note of this. You write it down because you will have to use this in the few calculations. Right, so read through the slide and let me know if there's anything that you find difficult or you want me to clarify. No? Okay, so I hope you wrote this down. We'll take a photo of the slide. Right, so if you, and this will be a negative value. Right, the value that you get here will be negative because we know that the demand relationship is a negative relationship when the price increases quantity demanded. So the answer will get should be a negative answer. Right. So now here, so elasticity, when you calculate elasticity, then we can find the prices, market prices, quantities, and you calculate elasticity. Once you calculate elasticity, you will see that elasticity ranges from 0 to minus infinity, right? 0 to minus infinity. So depending on the value that you get, by looking at the value that you get, we can categorize any good into 5 types of goods. So into one of these 5 categories, right? So the first is perfectly inelastic. Second type is inelastic. Third is unitary. Then elastic and perfectly elastic goods. Right, but we only look at absolute value. Although you get a negative answer, we only look at the value only, not the sign. Right, so what are perfectly inelastic goods? The first type of goods. So these types of goods are goods where you spend a very little, minute, negligible amount of your income, right? So perfectly inelastic, the word gives you a clue that they are perfectly inelastic. They are not at all responsive. Your demand is not affected by the change in the price. For example, let's say a box of matches, which is very cheap. So just because if my income is relatively high, the box of matches, it changes from 5 rupees to 6 rupees, I would still buy the same amount. Let's say when the one box of matches, one box is 5 rupees, I used to buy 10 boxes. When it increases up to 6, I would still buy 10 boxes. Again, කලින් ගත්ත ගානම මම quantity එකම purchase කරනවා, price එක වෙනස් වුණා කියලා මගේ demand එක වෙනස් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. So you can see now, if when the price increases or decreases, if your demand stays the same, it's not responsive, doesn't change, they are called perfectly inelastic goods. Okay? They are perfectly inelastic. What stretchy there. Then the second time, inelastic goods. Right now, these are relatively, or some people call it, in some textbooks, you will see that they are called relatively elastic goods. So relatively inelastic goods. So relatively inelastic, meaning when your price increases by a certain percentage, the quantity demanded will go down by a percentage that is less than that percentage. So let's say the price of the good increases by 5%. The quantity demanded will go down by, let's 4, 3, 2, 1, an amount which is less than 5. Right? So it's still responsive. It's responsive, meaning when the price increases, there will be a demand, reduction in the demand, but that will be less than the increase in the price. And so those are called inelastic goods. For example, necessities now. Sugar, dal, flour, rice, those are necessities. Even staple foods, right? So you have to buy these on a daily basis or a weekly basis. So you have to eat. Therefore, even if the price increases, you still tend to buy. Quantity but you still tend to buy some amount of this good. They are called inelastic goods. So necessities, staple foods, essential foods, now these come under inelastic goods. Right? Unitary elastic, meaning that if the price goes up by 5%, if the price of the product goes up by 5%, the quantity goes down by 5%. The same amount. 1% quantity demanded will go down by 1%. Right? That's why it's called unitary unit. Right? Same amount. Then fourth category, elastic goods. Now, can you think of examples? Now, these goods are very responsive. If the price goes up by 5%, the quantity demanded goes down by a percentage that is greater than 5. 5% price quantity demanded 5% very percentage, 6, 7, 10, 20%. Right? So they are very stretchy and elastic. Price demand portion making Right. So these goods have lots of close substitutes. For example, now milk powder has lots of substitutes. Certain biscuit brands, right, with lots of substitutes. So when you why does that happen? When the price increases, people can easily go for substitutes. So therefore, when the price increases by a small amount, the demand goes down by a larger amount, large percentage or a proportion, right? So that's the idea. Those are called elastic goods. Then perfectly elastic. Perfectly means people, we call it, consumer would exit this brand or this good, right? For example, vegetables or fruits, which are very homogeneous, right? If a seller changes or increases the price by even a small amount, people would even stop buying that. Vegetables, you can live with by consuming other types of vegetables. You don't really have to buy one if it's really expensive. Right? So if they have lots of very close substitutes, then it can be a perfectly elastic good. When the price increases by a small amount, even people would stop buying that good. Perfectly elastic. Okay, is this clear? Right, so let's look at an example. Now, read this example and see if you can work this out. The answer is also there. So you simply have to substitute these values to the formula that we just discussed, the elasticity formula, this one in the box. And so you can work this out. So let's try to work this out. Says the price of bread has increased from rupees 15 to 20. So the price of bread has gone up from 15 to 20. And as a result, what would happen to the quantity demanded of bread? Thus, this would go down from 14 to 7 per week. Right? So now the difference is here, it's 20. So you always take away or deduct the new amount by the original amount. So don't get this wrong. So 20 minus 5 is plus 5. And here 7 minus 14 is minus 7. So these signs are very important. So there's a negative change. So in price, it's a positive change, right? So now we're going to look at the elasticity, price elasticity of bread. So quantity change in quantity of bread. So change in price of bread, original price of bread divided by quantity of bread. Right. So first we'll substitute the numbers for the denominator in the numerator here. So change in QB or change in the quantity of bread is minus 7. Yeah, this one. And then the change in the price of bread is 5. That's a positive 5. Times price of bread. Now we go with the original price of bread, which is 15. The original price of the quantity of bread is 14. Right? So now it's a simple calculation. And what would be the answer? The answer is given here. It's minus 1.29. So we know if we've done it right, you should get a minus number because the demand relationship is a minus or an inverse relationship. So minus 1.29. 1.49. And right. So what can we say by looking at this value? Now, if you're doing this in the real situation, you would analyze the model that you show earlier, and then from that you can talk about elasticities of different goods, right? So here was 1.49, and if I look at, and it might fall into one of these groups. So what it means is when the price increases by 1 unit or 1%, the demand goes down because it's negative, goes down or decreases by 1.49%. Right? So if you consider that, which group does this fall into? So it's inelastic, isn't it? And that's correct because it's an essential or a good. So it's an inelastic good. When the price increases by 1%, the demand decreases by, sorry, it actually falls, it's an elastic good in this case. So when the price increases by 1%, the elasticity increases by a percentage that is greater than 1. So it's because it's 1.49. So it's an elastic good. Right. So by looking at this value, you can see what type of a good it is. Any questions? Okay, so if there are no questions, we can move on to supply theory. So now, so far, we've looked at how consumers make decisions and theory behind demand. And now we look at the other actor in the market, which is the producer or the supplier, right? So demand, we discussed in Luma, or the supply side, right? Right, so consumers demand various products and services, agent in the economy, and we call them suppliers. And so we, in this lesson, today's lesson, we will look at the supply side and how supply and market forces work in the market. And then we will talk about the firm in detail, probably in, next week. Right. So just like in the case of the demand, we can talk about factors affecting supply, right? So consider any product or service, let's say production of tea or rubber or paddy or any crop, right? Or livestock or even any service, right? What factors would affect the supply? So we call them the determinants of supply. So can you think of factors that would affect the supply of, let's say, tea? So we can write the determinants in the form of a function, just like in the demand case. So the quantity supplied of paddy is a function or would change or would vary with certain factors that affect the supply of paddy. What paddy? What are the factors that you think? Obviously, it's own price, right? So suppliers definitely would look at the price of paddy in the market. So we know that, if it's low, they tend to store and not supply to the market. So its own price will have an impact on the quantity supplied of paddy to the market. Right? එයාගේ price එක මත depend on supply එක. Then the prices of other products, P1 to P2, any other product, substitute products, price of flour would affect the price of the quantity supplied of paddy. Right? Flour price එක වෙනස් වෙනකොට quantity paddy supply එකට ඒක බලපාන්න පුළුවන්. What else? What else? So here you see the third factor, prices of factors of production. What are the factors of production? Land, labor, capital, and management. So input prices will have an impact on quantity supply, right? We know when labor charges increase, that will reduce the supply of paddy. So factors of production, prices of factors of production. State of technology. Let's say now you are introduced with, you mechanize the paddy field, or you get introduced, or the government introduces new high yielding variety that could increase the supply of paddy. Paddy, right? P stands for paddy, S stands for supply, quantity supply. The technology, definitely, right? Government intervention, subsidies that the government gives to the farmers, taxes and quotas, these things can have an impact on the amount supplied. What else? Advertising, right? Advertisements. What else? Certification, right? Accreditation. If the government asks all the paddy processing firms to adopt a certain quality certificate like GAP or GM or SLSI or ISO, whatever, that's quite costly, could affect the supply of paddy to the market. So likewise, there will be so many factors that affects the supply of paddy. So just like in the case of demand, we are going to consider one factor at a time, and we are going to keep others constant. And there's a word for that, and we call it ceteris paribus, meaning that we consider only one factor at a time, and all other factors are constant. Right. So first, we will take the relationship between paddy price and the quantity supplied. Right. So if you right, so just think of the supply side. So as consumers, we like it when the prices reduce, prices go down, but producers like it when the prices increase, right? So for example, paddy suppliers will want the price to go up, the market price to go up. So therefore, what do you see? If you draw a graph with price and quantity, price on this axis and the quantity on this axis, just like the demand, you can see as the price increases, the quantity supplied increases, right? in the case of demand, when the price increases, quantity decreases, but it's the opposite here. So you can see that you see or you get a positive relationship when it comes to supply. Price ka value when to quantity supply value when right? Right. So you can see its own price. That happens along the supply curve. See the similarities between demand and supply. When its own price changes, that change takes place along this supply curve, right? So let's look at supply shifters. All other factors except its own price, and all other factors, when these factors change, they are called supply shifters. These factors will shift the supply curve. Right? Prices of inputs and resources, for example, labor prices, the prices of hired equipment. When these change, the supply will shift. Curve it will shift outwards or inwards. The number of producers, we know that as the number of producers increases, there will be a higher supply to the market. So that will shift the supply curve because we are not told that its own price, at the same price, the supply curve will shift. Technology, taxes and subsidies, expectations. Now, taxes and subsidies, we will talk about this in the next session, but because it's important, but we will take technology, for example. Right now, let's assume that this is the price and quantity supplied, and this is the supply curve for paddy. Right, and let's say now this is this could be the original price in the market, let's say 10 per kilo, original price. And at this price, the supply 50 goes to the market. This is the original supply curve. So what would happen if these suppliers or the producers are introduced with a new high-yielding variety, right? That gives a higher yield or a bumper harvest. What would happen to the supply? How would you show that using this curve or graph? So now it's not its own price. Its own price is constant. If its price changed, had the price changed, then it would have happened along the curve. But now the price stays constant or fixed. But because of this new technology, new variety introduced, you get a higher or a greater harvest. And as a result, for the same price, these suppliers can supply a higher or a greater supply to the market. So let's call it S1, the new supply curve. And that price line touches the supply curve there. So if you draw a line all the way down, you get a higher quantity, which let's say like 75 kilos. The same price because of this new high yielding variety, right? So you can see now, except its own price, other factors shift the demand curve, right? Could be outwards or inwards, right? What would happen if the labor prices go up? Labor prices increases per person, daily wage increases. What would happen then? We can, using a similar graph, we can show that the supply curve would shift, and as a result, the quantity supplied would reduce. Right, so it's very similar to demand theory, and you can also find the elasticity of supply. Elasticity if the price goes up by a certain percentage, the quantity affected by the price change. If the price changes by 10%, by how much does quantity supplied increase? So that's about supply curve. So now we have identified two forces in the market, right? The supply and demand. Right. So we can say that as consumers, we say our objectives, the objective of the consumer. What's the objective of a consumer? What would be the objective? Now, we've talked about consumer theory earlier on. So consumers, the ultimate objective we say is to maximize our utility or satisfaction. We discussed utility earlier. So the ultimate objective of a consumer, we say, is to maximize utility. Is to maximize utility. So to maximize utility, we saw that we like it when the prices decrease, prices go down, prices maximum utility we saw that earlier. Now, so consumers' objective or the goal is to maximize utility. What would be the objective of a producer or a supplier? So producer's objective, we say, is to maximize profit, isn't it? Any producer, it would be to maximize profit. That's the rational producer. So therefore, the producers or suppliers like it when the prices or the price increases. We like it, we want to push the demand curve down, push the price down, whereas the suppliers would want to push the price down. So there are two forces working in the market. If you consider the market for any good, let's say now this is the paddy market. So we saw that consumers are trying to push the price down, whereas the suppliers are trying to push the price up. So in an ideal market, in a perfectly competitive market, so in an ideal market, these two forces would work and they would decide on a price that is agreed by both producers and suppliers. So now that price we call as equilibrium price. Now please star is to denote that it's equilibrium. You can see in the paddy market, the supply curve intersects the demand curve here. So now this point, where the cross kind of point, equilibrium, market equilibrium here, right? Market equilibrium. That price is P star and that corresponding quantity is Q star. Now this is the price at which the producers prefer to supply and consumers prefer to consume, right? Right. So now in an ideal market, when there is no artificial price increase or decrease, then අපි tax එකක් ගාලා price එක වැඩි කරන්න or when විදියක price එක අඩු කරන්නේ නැතුව, if you let the forces work by itself, then we say both the suppliers and the the consumers are happy, they are well off, right? But so right, so this is the market equilibrium, which we just discussed. Right, so what would happen if the price increases, now let's say now this is paddy market equilibrium, what would happen when the price goes up? P star is the original equilibrium price. What would happen if for some reason the price increases? Right, so here you can see now there's a new price. The price is P star, let's say 10 per kilo. Now this goes up to 12 per kilo. And as a result, now this is the new price line. So the new price line touches the market supply curve here. Right? And that's the new supply now. The original supply and demand are the same. Right? Are the same. The quantity they come in, right? But now, as the price increases, there's a new quantity supplied. Because why? Because we know that suppliers like it when the price is high or higher than the original or the equilibrium price. Therefore, they tend to supply more. Now they supply more. Now the price quantity supplied has increased up to, let's say, from 5 to 10. The price line touches the demand curve. From that, we can find the quantity demanded. Now, we can see that this is about, let's say, 2. That's the demand at the new price. So now, we have a new demand at a new supply. Supply is 10. The demand is 2. The kilos, 10 kilos of supply, 2 kilos of is the demand. So what do you see here? Now we can see in this case, the price increases, the supply is greater than the demand, right? So we say that there is an excess demand or a surplus in the market, right? When the price increases. Because, you tend to, more suppliers might come into the market even because knowing that the price is higher in the market. Right, so we call that this difference as the excess supply. So what would happen if the price goes down? What would happen if the price goes down? Let's say this much, P2. From the original price, the equilibrium price, the price goes down to P2. Now again, you can see there's the price line touches the supply curve, the purple line there. So if you draw a line all the way down, and let's say this is about 3. And this is the demand curve now. You can see the demand curve in green. So that's about, let's say, 7. So now the demand is greater than the supply, right? Price account. How people tend to purchase or demand more, but suppliers don't like it. They supply less. Now the supply is 3 kilos, demand is 7, so therefore there is an excess demand in the market or a shortage in the market when the price goes down, right? So you can see now when the prices change or vary or go up or down from the equilibrium, it affects one of the parties, right? It either affects the suppliers or the consumers, right? So a policymaker would want to know, so whenever you impose any kind of market, price control or a tax or a subsidy, a policymaker would want to know how it's going to affect the economy, right? So how do you do that? How do you estimate that? So you would now, the ideal situation in the market would be, so you have price and quantity here, and rather the market. This would be the supply, and this would be the demand, and this is the original, or sorry, the equilibrium price, isn't it? P star and Q star. So we said that this is the ideal situation where both the consumers and the producers are happy, right? Producers are happy to sell at this price, and the consumers are happy to consume at this price, and this is the perfect situation where both consumers and the producers are well off. And so we call this the consumer surplus. Consumer surplus meaning, now the market price, the demand curve shows how much you're willing to pay. You're willing to pay 10 rupees for this good, but the market price is less. So it's about 2 rupees. So you are actually paying less than what you would pay in the market, right? So consumers are happy. And I may triangle like it up again, a consumer surplus. This entire green triangle, right? And this triangle is called the producer surplus because producers are willing to pay these amounts, but actually in the market they get a higher price. Now we can up producer surplus. So both the producers are, consumers are happy at this price. But what would happen if the price increases, let's say due to a tax, right? Or some other price increases up to let's say this much. The price goes up to 5 rupees per kilo, right? Now you can see that the consumer surplus, right? Kalintipa consumer surplus this entire green triangle, but now this green triangle has gone down to this red small triangle. We can see that when the price increase, that affects the consumers negatively or adversely because you don't like it when the price is high and the demand goes down. So now their consumer surplus has gone down, right? This is the new price. And see, producers like it when the price is high. And producers are කැමති මේක දෙකේ ඉඳන් පහ වෙනකම් වැඩි වුණාට එන ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ මේ පොඩි triangle එක නම් වැඩි වෙලා තියෙනවා මේ ලොකු triangle එක වෙනකම්. So you can see now the consumers are not happy, but the producers are happy. So when the price increases, the consumers are affected adversely. The producers are happy, right? So they get a positive impact, and the consumers get a negative impact. And price එක අඩු වුණාමත් එහෙමයි, one party has a negative impact, the other party has a positive impact, right? So the government or the policymakers, or if you are doing an analysis to look at the impact of the price increase or decrease or change in price on the economy, this is what we would do. So you would find the original consumer surplus and the producer surplus, and you would try to calculate the surpluses due to this change in price, right? And you can show, you can give values to show that there will be this much of a impact on the economy, right? So now this is only, there are two parties, but when the government comes in, for example, if you impose a tax, the government also earns a revenue, so that also can be calculated, right? So that we will discuss in the next lesson, the tax impact. So tell me, do you have any questions up to what we have discussed so far?
Recording stopped.
Anything that you want me to clarify? Yeah, so just as a recap, we talked about, we started with the definition of economics, then we talked about different two disciplines of economics, why scientific study, questions about scarcity, opportunity cost, and different types of markets. And then we talked about Karl Marx and Das Kapital, a little bit on Adam Smith. And then we moved on to nature of demand and the term of demand. And we write the determinants in the form of a function if you want to estimate the demand function. Then we discussed the theory behind demand, utility, and Marshall utility, and so on. And indifference curve, the budget line. Then we talked about how certain factors affect the demand, its own price, cross prices or demand shifters. Then the change, elasticity of demand, where we quantify the change in factors on the quantity demanded. Yeah, and then we now discuss the supply side, which is very similar to demand and the estimation of demand. And then we talked about market equilibrium, factors affecting market equilibrium. So you can also show how certain factors could affect the equilibrium. For example, if the new technology is introduced, we know the supply will shift this way, isn't it? And we can discuss the supply curve would be this is the new supply curve. And now there is a new equilibrium here. So you can see now there's a higher quantity at a lower price. Right? So likewise, you can, using illustrations, you can figure out how certain factors affect the demand and the price. Okay? Right, so I think we can stop here for today, and we will start from where we stopped today next time. Okay. Anyone? Any questions? Okay, so the slides are there on LMS. I will also upload the recording in a little while. Okay, so shall we stop here for today?
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, right. Thank you. And see you next week.